What are some events in recorded history that are extremely hard to believe, but without a doubt actually happened? There was a Japanese man called Tsutomu Yamaguchi who was on his way to work in Hiroshima in 1945, when he saw falling through the sky, 2 miles from where he stood, what ultimately turned out to be the atomic bomb. He had just enough time to take cover in a ditch as the bomb detonated, and miraculously he survived. Somehow the Hiroshima train station was still operational, and so Yamaguchi, battered, bombed, and bruised, decided to board a train to his family home so he could recover in Nagasaki. 3 days later, Yamaguchi was called into work to explain what he saw, which he did. At work, as he began to tell the story of what happened, the second bomb dropped. It was the reinforced concrete walls around him that saved him this time, and Yamaguchi quickly ran to find his wife and son. Ground temperatures in the city reached 4,000 degrees Celsius, and radioactive rain poured down. The family's home was destroyed, but Yamaguchi's wife and son had thankfully been out shopping looking for burn ointment for Yamaguchi when the bomb fell, and they'd survived. Despite this ordeal of having survived 2 nuclear explosions and subsequent radiation exposure, Yamaguchi went on to live till 93 years of age. He died in 2010 after being recognized by the Japanese government as a Nijiya Hibakusha, or twice-bombed person. In 1908, Russia showed up 12 days late to the Olympics because the world switched calendars while they did not. To accommodate the Russian team, some events were rescheduled so that the Russian athletes could participate. This led to a longer duration for those Olympics, which lasted from April 27 to October 31, making it the longest Olympic Games in history. Michael Malloy, aka Mike the Durable, aka Iron Mike. During the Great Depression, 5 men took out a life insurance policy on a homeless alcoholic that they were sure was going to drink himself to death. The owner of a bar allowed him to drink for free, but he kept drinking and didn't die. So they tried to poison him with antifreeze. Didn't work. The turpentine, horse liniment, rat poison, methanol, still didn't work. A sandwich made with rotten sardines and tacks. Still no luck. Then they took his drunk body out in the cold and poured water on him. He lived. Then they ran him over with a car. He was in the hospital for 3 weeks, but survived. Then they poisoned him with carbon monoxide, and he finally died. They were all convicted of murder. So they tried to poison him with antifreeze. Fun fact: ethyl alcohol is an antidote to ethylene glycol poisoning. They both bind to the same receptors, are metabolized by the same enzyme, but alcohol takes priority. A serious alcoholic, when drunk, would just pass the glycol through their system with no issue. Gonna start an alcohol addiction just so no one can kill me with antifreeze. The Irish potato famine, 1845 to 1849, was a huge catastrophe that resulted in 1 million dying from starvation and 1 million leaving their homeland, mostly for North America. It's really hard to put into words how scarring this famine was for so many Irish people, and the suffering was tremendous. The psychological scars still impact Ireland's psyche today. It almost sounds like a fairy tale to hear how a sultan from a faraway land heard of this tragedy and went out of his way to send ships crammed with food and medicine to the Irish people dying from hunger and disease. When Ottoman Sultan Abdulmajid heard of the suffering from his Irish dentist, he felt great compassion and sorrow for the plight of the Irish. The Sultan originally wanted to donate £10,000 to the starving populace, but British diplomats were aghast to hear this because Queen Victoria had donated a small sum of £2,000. The British government refused to accept the large donation, so he only donated a measly sum of £1,000, but he secretly sent 5 ships loaded with food. As you can imagine, the British government wasn't happy to hear of this, and the Navy attempted a blockade to stop the aid from arriving. The ships made it through the lines and arrived at Drogheda, Ireland, where they dispersed the food. The people of Drogheda were so thankful that they had the Islamic and Ottoman symbols added to their city's coat of arms. It really does read like a fairy tale, and is a gesture of great empathy. It's easy to imagine how happy the starving people were to see those Turkish ships arriving with food. According to James Hacktook, people were living, or rather starving, upon turnip tops, sandals and seaweed, a diet which no one in England would consider fit for the meanest animal. But the story does not end there. During the Crimean War, Britain joined the Ottoman Empire in their fight against the expanding Russian Empire. About 30,000 Irish soldiers served in the war, and it was noticed that the Irish people served enthusiastically in defense of the Sultan who had helped them during their greatest times of need. This highest form of compassion was even remembered during the First World War. It was reported that British officers complained that the Irish lacked the will to fight against the Ottomans, who remembered stories of the Ottoman Empire helping during a famine when no one else would. Sultan Abdulmajid is a model of faith in humanity being restored. There was no famine. The British took Irish crops to feed themselves and quash Irish independence. It was an act of genocide. In 1847, the Choctaw people raised money to send. Nicholas Alcemade fell 18,000 feet without a parachute from a burning plane in 1944 and suffered no serious injury. I see how the snow cover helped, but how he didn't get skewered by pine trees or break a single bone is shocking. Imagine what he was thinking when he got up from that fall. What kind of crazy thoughts were running through his head? Yeah, no one is gonna believe this one. Whoa, am I immortal? If you are ever in that situation, dense pine trees are about the best thing you can hope. Only thing better is dense pine trees in an area with fresh powder snow. Trees' branches typically are thinnest at the top, and every branch you hit on the way down transfers your momentum in increments. Typically you'll still die. And double typically you'll at least break your legs. And triple typically you would still succumb to your wounds in the wilderness before rescue. On second thought, aim for the pavement. That time everyone died of a dancing sickness where they danced themselves to death in France. Mass hysteria. Yup, St. Vitus dance, as it is called, still doesn't have a definitely known cause, if I remember correctly, either. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, please. John O'Neill, the FBI agent in charge of investigating Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden in the 1990s, grew frustrated with the bureaucratic politics within the FBI and between the FBI and CIA that he felt hampered his mission. He decided to leave the FBI and take a higher-paying job in the private sector. In August 23, 2001, he became the chief of security at the World Trade Center. He was killed in the attacks just a few weeks later. Looks like someone had a grudge to settle. My colleague was on the plane to Hawaii where the entire top of the plane ripped off. They flew the rest of the way without any overhead. Landed and everyone walked off. Absolutely insane to see the pictures. Talk about being given a second chance. My father-in-law was on a flight. He always keeps his seat belt on unless getting up for some reason. Lady beside him made a comment. You can take your seat belt off now. He told her. He never does unless it's necessary, said. You never know if something's going to happen, and you don't want to be trying to get buckled in an emergency. She said, you know what? That makes a lot of sense, and she buckled back up. An hour later they hit some nasty turbulence, and the plane dropped like a rock, forget how many feet, but it was substantial. The drop was so fast that the flight attendant and her cart smashed against the ceiling, and then dropped back down. He said he was sure he was done for. Other passengers not buckled in also hit the ceiling. Many people had bumps and bruises, and I think at least one had a broken arm. The lady beside him just kept thanking him over and over for convincing her to stay buckled. The incident was in the news, and he got 2 free flights out of it as an apology. I still find it totally insane that we were able to put men on the moon with the technology of the time. It blows my mind. Probably the greatest of all human achievement. Isn't that insane? They were hand-checking the fucking math. Edit, I have to add, this woman they deemed a computer did many, if not most of these calculations, early on of course. Catherine studied how to use geometry for space travel. She figured out the paths for the spacecraft to orbit, go around Earth and to land on the moon. NASA used Catherine's math, and it worked. NASA sent astronauts into orbit around Earth. Later, her math helped send astronauts to the moon and back. NASA could not have done these things without Katherine Johnson and her love for math. Edit 2. Just realized I chose a age K4 article. LOL gets the job done though. And it was only 66 years after the first flight of the Wright brothers. People born in the 1880s were old enough to see wooden planes take their first flights in the sky to humanity landing a man on the moon. Edwin Booth, brother of John Wilkes Booth, saved the life of Robert, the son of President Abraham Lincoln. Top 10 anime redemption arcs be like. Edit, misspelled redemption. Actually reversed. This incident happened a few months before the assassination Robert had not yet joined the army, and served under Grant during some of the last stages of the Spring '65 campaign. Halley's Comet appeared in the sky when Mark Twain was born in 1835. The comet moves in a 75 or 76-year orbit, and, as it neared Earth once again, Twain said, "I came in with Halley's Comet and I expect to go out with it." Sure enough, he died on April 21, 1910, just as the comet made its next pass within sight of Earth. The Battle of Bull Run, one of the first battles of the U.S. Civil War, occurred on and around Wilmer McLean's farm in northern Virginia. Not wanting to live surrounded by war, McLean and his family moved to Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. The Battle of Appomattox Courthouse was the last significant battle between Union and Confederate forces. The Confederates signed the surrender order in Wilmer's sitting room. It is said that the Civil War started on Wilmer's farm and ended in his sitting room. He was not happy about it, either, as he stated he had moved specifically to get away from the war as much as he possibly could. When the pyramids were being built, woolly mammoths still existed. The last use of the guillotine in France was the same year Star Wars was founded. Sir Christopher Lee was in attendance of the last public execution in France. Star Wars was founded a long time ago. Theodore Roosevelt found his boat was stolen. So he built a new boat, tracked the thieves down, and arrested them. He then proceeded to walk them multiple days, without sleeping, so they could receive a trial instead of just shooting them on the spot. It was in the middle of a harsh winter, so he didn't handcuff them, for fear they'd get frostbite, so instead he just kept himself awake by reading Tolstoy with a gun trained on them the whole trek. That's only the 22nd most Teddy thing I've ever read, but a new one which makes me love it. I am always half convinced that Teddy Roosevelt was not a real person. No one could have been that absolutely wild and done that many things, but there is just too much overwhelming proof. Palm trees, among other flora, were present in Antarctica during the early Eocene epoch, between 55 and 48 million years ago. Only somewhat related, I just read an article about an extinct type of date palm that they found seeds of that are 2,000 years old, and they've recently managed to grow 6 palms, 4 male and 2 female, from them, and thus have brought back an extinct species of palm tea and its fruit. So cool. Christmas Day 1914. The truce on the WW1 battlefields shows the humanity inside everyone, but they were able to wake up the next day and go straight back to war, kill the men that they'd spent a sincere day with. I can't remember where I saw or heard the story, I think from the BBC, but I believe from one of the last living Tommies, who said that whilst they were forced to start shooting at each other, the majority of shots intentionally missed, from both sides of no man's land. I believe it was also the same man who said, in reference to Remembrance Day, to also remember the Germans. That stuck with me. They were like our lads, sent out to fight a war for war's sake, forced to do unspeakable things to other men because some higher-up told them they had to. In 1903, the New York Times published an article about flying machines. They stated that it would take the combined efforts of all mathematicians and mechanics 1 to 10 million years for powered flight to be achieved. Anyway, about 9 weeks later, the Wright brothers achieved powered flight for the first time. They were also overly cynical afterwards. In 1910 they said that flight would only ever be for billionaires. Of course we had commercial flights by around the 60s achievable for many. People of the time couldn't look at the progress over the previous few centuries and realize we would leapfrog over it in the next few decades. In 2019, a convicted murderer on day release bravely fought off a terrorist at London Bridge with a narwhal tusk. Edited to add that he was a convicted murderer. Edited again to add that the guy with the narwhal tusk was a civil servant, and the convict on day release battled the terrorist with a fire extinguisher. This story gets more awesome with every correction. Winky face. Almost as good as the Scottish bloke who kicked that airport van attacker so hard in the balls he broke his foot while the dude was on fire. In 2020 in Sydney, Australia, a bystander managed to take down a guy who was on a rampage with a knife by pinning him down with a milk crate. On the 24th of June 2023, the most important Russian mercenary group marched on Moscow, just to give up a few hours later. In 2014, Pope Francis released doves in the Vatican to symbolize his hopes for peace in the world. As soon as the doves began to fly, A seagull and a crow swooped down and attacked them in front of everyone. That's fucking ominous. The Great Molasses Flood of 1919, that took place in Boston, Massachusetts. 40-foot wave that killed 21 people. Elevator operator Betty Lou Oliver survived a fall of 75 stories while in an elevator in 1945. I looked this up. What's insane about this is that a plane crashed where she was working and she was being rescued when she fell 79 stories. It's just insane. How? Any idea? Did a little jump at the last second. A U.S. President Roosevelt issued an executive order that made it illegal for U.S. citizens to keep U.S. gold coins. They made everyone return them or be subject to imprisonment and large fine. The government confiscated over 2,600 metric tons. I've read that when people find buried gold in the U.S., it's usually from people hiding it during this time. No idea if that's true, though. The Nutmeg Wars. The Dutch and the English went to war 3 times over nutmeg, which at the time was only known to grow on one South Pacific island. John Tyler was the 10th President of the United States. He was born in 1790 and took office in 1841. His grandson died in 2020. I know he had 2 still alive recently, but one died, so I think there might still be one left. Someone booked a speaking event at the wrong 4 Seasons and proceeded with the speaking engagement at a landscaping company next to a sex toy store. The stream of hair dye running down his cheek was the cherry on top. The Holocaust. It's surreal to think people can be so cruel. The Holocaust happened and lots of people said, never again. But immediately forgot that when other genocides happened later that are happening now in Yugoslavia, Kosovo, Khmer Rouge, Syria, Bangladesh, Sudan, China, etc. I don't think the Holocaust is the outlier and it was so bad. It's the outlier in that lots of people came together and actually tried to do something to stop it from happening again, opposed to other genocides that were effectively ignored or excused or symbolically punished. About as bad is the people who deny it happened. Dwight D. Eisenhower knew there were going to be deniers. Eisenhower ordered a team of photographers to take the pictures as evidence. You could say that about much of human history. The level of organization and industrialization of the Holocaust is staggering, but the cruelty? That's pretty common for human history. Some guy built a submarine that safety experts said would implode. He said they were hating on him and went ahead into the sea anyway, and it imploded. Source on this? On February 1, 1942, following a bombing raid on the Marshall Islands, the Enterprise came under attack by 5 twin-engine Japanese bombers. The lead aircraft, led by Lieutenant Kazuo Nakai, badly damaged by anti-aircraft fire, turned back towards the Enterprise, attempting to ram it. Seeing this, Gato abandoned his watch post and jumped in a nearby Dauntless parked on the flight deck, and returned fire using the rear-facing .30 caliber machine gun. His fire disabled the aircraft, causing it to narrowly miss the Enterprise, only hitting parked aircraft, including the one Gato was in, before spiraling into the sea. Upon seeing this act, Vice Admiral William Halsey Spa promoted him to aviation machinist mate first class. And later he survived being shot down, only to be picked up by the Japanese, brutally tortured, and finally thrown overboard whilst attached to an anchor. His ending really sucked, and showed how brutally the Japanese treated their POWs. Saint Olga of Kiev. Her story is the ultimate revenge tale. I highly recommend people looking her up, but in short, her husband was killed by a neighboring tribe and she sought vengeance. The neighboring faction then sought to take over her own, seeing as she was a weak woman and ruling in her dead husband's place as her own son was too young. She invited them to her town as a show of honor. When the large party of messengers arrived, they were soon attacked and backed into a massive trench that Olga's people had dug the nights before. Standing over the trench, she asked them if they found the honor to their taste, and buried them alive. But she wasn't even close to finished with her quest for vengeance. She sent message back to the enemy saying she would accept an allegiance by marriage, painting herself as such a feeble woman that she would gladly relinquish her power to her enemy. But she requested all high chieftains to visit her town, to socialize and garner favor. The chieftains came. She invited them into the bathhouse to relax before a feast. They were locked inside and burned to death. But she wasn't done. Her next feat is her most incredible. after taking out most people of power from the other faction. She demanded tribute from their towns and villages. Not in gold, not in any material goods, but in the form of sparrows and pigeons. Thousands were delivered to her. The next night, she ordered her soldiers to tie a strip of sulfur to the birds' legs, set it alight, and release the birds. The birds flew back to the houses and homes they had nested in, and burned every village to the ground. The sky was apparently a blaze of fire for days. Olga emerged victorious and satiated. Don't fuck with Olga of Kiev. She is known, quite aptly, as the patron saint of vengeance and defiance. The Rwandan genocide. My sister just graduated from high school, US, and she never learned about it. I told her about it, and she did some research on it for a paper. Sadly, no one else in her class knew about it either. A summary for those who are too lazy to read the whole wiki page. During the 1994 Rwandan genocide, also known as 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, members of the Hutu ethnic majority in the East Central African nation of Rwanda murdered as many as 800,000 people, mostly of the Tutsi minority. Started by Hutu nationalists in the capital of Kigali, the genocide spread throughout the country with shocking speed and brutality, as ordinary citizens were incited by local officials and the Hutu power government to take up arms against their neighbors. By the time the Tutsi-led Rwandese Patriotic Front gained control of the country through a military offensive in early July, hundreds of thousands of Rwandans were dead and 2 million refugees fled Rwanda. In 1944, during the Allied invasion of France, 2 American paramedics, Ken Moore and Robert Wright, 101st Airborne, saved around 80 soldiers of both sides, Allied and Axis. They set themselves up in a church, had only what was in their first aid kits and medic bags, and had a strict no-gun policy. The church was almost destroyed by a mortar shell, but it didn't go off. It was almost destroyed again, due to friendly fire. Ken Moore would risk his life by venturing out of the church and finding injured soldiers, and both medics stayed behind at the church, even though the rest of their forces had to retreat. Wright took on the responsibility of looking after the soldiers. The church still stands in Angoville-Plain, France. The blood-stained pews are still there, and a broken tile from the mortar shell was never fixed, to honor the legacy of these men. This is very simplified, and probably inaccurate in a few ways, but it is still an incredible story. I lived near the 101st. I was invited to this big spectacle on the base that had this high-ranking army official walk among the troops. They had not been able to do this for a few years because the 101 was so heavily deployed in Iraq-Afghanistan, but when they did it, they invite all veteran soldiers in town to come and stand on the field to present themselves. That's when I found out there were still men here in my town who fought in the 101 during World War II. Some were in wheelchairs, but they still came. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. I had no idea I lived among them. It's been 15 years now, so they may all be gone now, but got a while, I lived alongside them. The Battle of Castle Itter in WW2 was fought between the Waffen-SS and a group comprised of American and German soldiers, local resistance fighters, and several French celebrities, including Paul Renault, who had been the Prime Minister of France during WW1. Including a tennis player who lobbed grenades through opened windows with his racket. Yes, for real. There would have been a third, and a nuclear world war and possibly the end of the world if Stanislaw Petro didn't react like he did on the 25th of September 1983. In short, he was the only one that questioned the readings on the Russian missile alert system and refused to launch nuclear counter-missiles. Yup, and another Soviet sub-commander refused to fire missiles after spurious data about incoming missiles. 2 guys prevented WW3, both Soviets. Mao Zedong, in his infinite hubris, thought that there would be no repercussions from an attempt to completely eliminate rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. Plot twist: there were repercussions. Millions of people organized into groups and hit noisy pots and pans to prevent sparrows from resting in their nests, with the goal of causing them to drop dead from exhaustion. Sparrows were replaced with bed bugs, as the extermination of sparrows had upset the ecological balance, which subsequently resulted in surging locust and insect populations that destroyed crops due to a lack of a natural predator. The ecological disruption was one of several factors that led to a famine that killed 45 million people. that animals, if trained enough, can smell out disease. A flock of pigeons was able to correctly spot cancer in breast tissue biopsy images with 99% accuracy, on par with human experts. That cigarettes with 70 cancer-causing substances are allowed for sale. In Germany, it causes €100 billion damage to economy every year and 120,000 deaths and millions of people with cancer. It is unbelievable this poison is allowed for sale. I think alcohol would like to have a word. Everything having to do with Mad Jack Churchill. He reads like someone's self-insert OC in a historical fiction based on World War II, except he's all real. He was a Brit who fought in World War II without guns, instead preferring a longbow, a claymore sword, and bagpipes. Despite this, he won a lot. He single-handedly took a whole village back from the Nazis by taking his shirt off and stealthing around to scare the crap out of them with his sword. After the Nazis captured him one time and held him prisoner, under the mistaken belief he was related to Winston Churchill, the prison was raided by the Allies and he was set free. Or he would have, had he not already escaped 2 weeks prior. He was on the beach on D-Day, with men under his command, and held them up in their boat while he played a song on the bagpipes, finished, lobbed a grenade onto the beach, and then charged. The war ended, and he was bored, so he went to the Pacific to go fight the Japanese. That ended too, so he got bored in retirement and invented river surfing. This is just a scrap of the historical anomaly that is Mad Jack Churchill. He ended up with an office job in London and commuted to work by train each day. If you ended up in a carriage with him on the way home in the evening, you'd be startled to see a respectable-looking older gentleman get up out of his seat, open a window, hurl his briefcase out, then sit down and keep reading his newspaper. The rail line ran right past his house, so he'd throw his briefcase into the backyard to save having to carry it home from the station, and to let his wife know he'd be home soon and to put the kettle on. What are some events in recorded history that are extremely hard to believe? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.